The planet Valther Prime had once been beautiful. That was what the older soldiers said. They talked about wide green fields that once stretched from the eastern mountains all the way to the shining waters of the Silver Sea. They spoke about the capital city, where tall crystal towers caught the morning light and scattered colors across the streets below. They remembered warm winds moving through the grass. They remembered markets full of voices and music. They remembered a sky that was quiet. They spoke about these things the way people talk about something they know they will never see again. Because now, there was nothing left. The fields were ash. The crystal towers were broken stumps of glass and steel. The streets were buried under gray dust, and the air was thick with smoke and a distant rumble of explosions that never truly stopped. The war had been going on for 2 years, 2 long years of losing. For 400 years before this war began, the Galactic Coalition had lived in peace. It was a powerful alliance of 7 advanced alien civilizations, each one older than most worlds in the known galaxy. Each one with powerful fleets, brilliant scientists, and military commanders who had studied warfare for centuries. Together, they believed themselves unstoppable. For 400 years, nothing had proven them wrong. Then the Croth Dominion arrived, the T first. The Coalition thought they understood the enemy. Another empire, another species seeking territory or resources. They were wrong. The Croth were not a nation. They were a hive. Every soldier, every drone, every ship was connected to a single massive mind. One vast intelligence that controlled everything at once. There were no individuals among them that feared, hesitation, panic. When a Croft drone died, the hive simply recorded the loss and continued. When 1,000 died, the hive adjusted its strategy and sent more. Emotion never entered the equation. They were perfect soldiers, and they were winning in 14 months. The Coalition had lost 9 major battles, 3 entire star systems had fallen. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from 5 species had died. Still the Croth came, steady, endless, like a tide that never grew tired. It was on a cold gray morning on Valther Prime that General Orthen finally said the thing everyone had been thinking, but no one had dared to speak. Orthen belonged to the Sorathi, a species known across the galaxy for one thing above all else: their minds. They were tall, thin beings with pale, silver skin and 4 long arms. Their brains processed information faster than most computers. They could run complex calculations in seconds. Sorathi did not guess. They did not hope. They worked with facts, and the facts that morning were very clear. Orthen stood before the Coalition War Council, a chamber filled with commanders and ambassadors from all 7 species. Behind him, massive screens showed battle statistics and fleet reports. His voice was calm, flat, precise. The Croth produced new soldiers faster than we could destroy them, he said. Images shifted on the screens. Fleet losses, supply shortages, shrinking defensive lines. Our current supply lines will collapse within 7 months, Orthen continued. Our remaining defensive systems will fail shortly after. He paused. Then he said the words that froze the entire room. This war cannot be won. Silence filled the chamber. Some of the commanders began speaking at once. Angry voices, frightened voices. One elderly Dravathi commander lowered his head into his hands and said nothing at all. Orthen continued calmly. It is not a matter of bravery or strategy. He gestured toward the data. It is mathematics. Every battle the Coalition fought cost them more than it cost the enemy. Even victories drained their strength faster than the Croth could lose theirs. The enemy was not simply powerful. The enemy was endless. And the Coalition was slowly running out of everything: ships, resources, soldiers, hope. Ambassador Saravel sat quietly while the argument filled the room. He was not a soldier. He was a diplomat. For 2 years, he had watched brilliant commanders send fleets in a battle, only to see those fleets vanish. He had watched entire worlds fall. He had watched courage accomplish nothing against a machine that never tired. He felt exhausted in a way that sleep could never fix. But even now, something inside him refused to accept the end. He waited until the noise in the chamber finally faded. Then he spoke. There is one option, he said quietly, that we have not tried. The room turned toward him. Saravel chose his words carefully. "There is a species," he said, "on a small world in the outer regions of Coalition space." He paused. "They are not members of the Coalition." General Orten slowly turned his pale head. "You are speaking," he said, "of the humans." "Yes." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a low sound echoed across the room. It was Commander Thex of the Velhari species. The sound was their version of a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Humans?" Thex said. "They have been traveling through space for less than 2 centuries. Our ships are faster than theirs. Our weapons are stronger. Their population is small compared to ours." He folded his heavy blue arms. "They have never fought a war on this scale." Saravel nodded. "That is true." "Then why," Thex asked, "would they succeed where 7 advanced civilizations have failed?" Saravel hesitated. He had spent months studying human history. It was strange, chaotic, full of disasters, wars, collapses, near-extinction events. And yet, every time humanity reached the edge of destruction, they survived. He did not fully understand why. "I do not know if they can help," Saravel admitted. The room waited. "But we have tried everything we understand," he continued quietly. "And it has not been enough." He looked around the chamber. "Perhaps what we need now is something we do not understand." The council argued for 3 more hours. In the end, they agreed. Not because they believed the humans could save them, but because nothing else remained. Late that night, a signal was sent across the dark of space. IT traveled toward a small blue-green planet orbiting a quiet yellow star. The message was simple, a formal request for help. And it carried the quiet desperation of an entire galaxy that had run out of options. On Vaeltha Prime, the explosions continued through the night. Coalition soldiers held their positions and tried not to think about the words General Orten had spoken that morning. The war could not be won. That was what the numbers said, but the numbers had not yet met the humans, and no one on the Coalition command deck expected what would happen next. Because when the long-range scanners finally detected ships entering the system, what appeared on the screens was not a small fleet. It was something far larger, something that made every officer on the bridge slowly stop. Breathing, humanity had answered the call, and they had not come alone. The battlefield had gone silent. The alien fleet that once darkened the sky was now nothing more than drifting wreckage, burning slowly in the cold vacuum of space. Across the galaxy, sensors recorded the same impossible truth. The humans had won. Not because they had the biggest ships, not because they had the most advanced weapons, but because they refused to surrender. Admiral Karth of the Galactic Council stood in stunned silence as the final report arrived. Entire enemy armadas gone. The war that had terrified hundreds of civilizations for centuries ended in a single brutal campaign. And the ones who ended it, humans. Across the council chamber, the representatives of dozens of species whispered among themselves. For years they had feared humanity, their unpredictable nature, their strange mix of compassion and terrifying violence. Now they finally understood. Humans were not the weakest species in the galaxy. They were the ones you called when everything else had already failed. As the human fleet prepared to leave the battlefield, a single message was broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. A calm human voice spoke just 5 words. "Next time, don't start wars." And from that day forward, no empire in the galaxy ever underestimated humanity again. The battlefield had gone silent. The alien fleet that once darkened the sky was now nothing more than drifting wreckage, burning slowly in the cold vacuum of space. Across the galaxy, sensors recorded the same impossible truth. The humans had won. Not because they had the biggest ships, not because they had the most advanced weapons, but because they refused to surrender. Admiral Karth of the Galactic Council stood in stunned silence as the final report arrived. Entire enemy armadas gone. The war that had terrified hundreds of civilizations for centuries ended in a single brutal campaign. And the ones who ended it, humans. Across the council chamber, the representatives of dozens of species whispered among themselves. For years they had feared humanity, their unpredictable nature, their strange mix of compassion and terrifying violence. Now, they finally understood. Humans were not the weakest species in the galaxy. They were the ones you called when everything else had already failed. As the human fleet prepared to leave the battlefield, a single message was broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. A calm human voice spoke just 5 words. Next time, don't start wars. And from that day forward, no empire in the galaxy ever underestimated humanity again. The first week of the human arrival was chaos. Not the kind of chaos that destroys an army, but a different kind. The kind that happens when something completely new enters a battlefield and refuses to behave the way anyone expects. For centuries, the Galactic Coalition had fought wars in organized and carefully structured ways. Every action had a protocol. Every movement had a rule. There were regulations for engagement distance, rules for acceptable unit losses, and strict doctrines about when to advance and when to retreat. These systems have been built over generations of experience. They worked out, or at least they had worked before the Croth Dominion arrived. Now the Coalition commanders watched the humans fight, and nothing about it followed the rules. Coalition tactical officers began sending back reports that were, in many cases, more confused than helpful. Human squads would push into positions that Coalition models said were not worth attacking. They would hold ground that Coalition mathematics said should be abandoned. Sometimes they would take heavy losses and fall back briefly. Then they would reorganize while still under enemy fire and attack the same position again from a completely different direction. That IT was not elegant, that IT was not clean. But strangely, it kept working. General Ordhen spent long hours studying the battle reports as a Sorthi. Understanding patterns was second nature to him. Every effective military force in the galaxy operated under clear strategic principles. Find a principle, and you could predict their behavior. But after 4 days of studying human operations, Ordhen walked into Ambassador Saravel's office and admitted something he did not say easily. "I cannot find the pattern," he said. Saravel looked up from his desk. Ordhen placed several data screens on the table. "Human units do not follow a fixed doctrine," the Sorthi general continued. "Each unit appears to make independent decisions during combat." He paused. "It should not work." Saravel studied the reports. "And yet," he said quietly. Ordhen nodded once. "And yet." What Ordhen was observing had no real name in Coalition military science. Human soldiers did not simply follow orders. They thought while they fought. Every battle was also a lesson. They watched what the enemy did. And before the battle was even over, they were already changing their tactics. That a Croth maneuver that worked in the first hour of combat often stopped working by the third. Not because command had issued new orders, but because the soldiers on the ground had already adapted. The Croth hive mind was incredibly fast, but it was fast at executing plans, not at inventing new ones. And the humans forced it to invent new plans constantly. 10 days into the fighting, a Coalition medic named Solon was assigned to work with a human infantry unit. She belonged to the Velhari, a species known for their physical strength and resilience. Solon had served in the war for 18 months. She believed she had seen almost everything combat could show her. The first day with the human unit changed that opinion quickly. During an afternoon engagement, a human soldier named Corporal Danny Reeves took a piece of shrapnel in his upper arm. Solon saw it happen. The wound was severe enough that Coalition medical doctrine required immediate removal from combat. Reeves dropped behind a broken wall. For a moment, Solon assumed he was waiting for a medic. Instead, he pulled a tool from his belt. He removed the piece of shrapnel himself, wrapped the wound tightly with a bandage, then stood back up and returned to the fight. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. Solon ran toward him, but Reeves waved her away. "Help him first," he said, pointing toward another soldier who had fallen nearby. Later that evening, Solon wrote a report in Velhari biology. A wound of that level normally caused severe shock and immediate combat withdrawal, but the human soldier had treated it differently. She wrote one line that later became famous among Coalition medical schools. The human soldier did not experience the wound as an interruption. He experienced it as an inconvenience. And it was not just one soldier. Solon saw it again and again. Human soldiers clearly felt pain. She could see in their faces, but they refused to let pain make decisions for them. They felt it, acknowledged it, then kept going at IT was as if the human mind could place pain somewhere else during battle, like locking it in another room until the fight was over. But what affected Solon the most happened on the 14th night. Earlier that day, a human platoon had defended a ridge against a Croth. Assault for 6 hours. They held the position, but they lost nearly a third of their soldiers doing it. According to Coalition protocol, a unit suffering losses that heavy would be removed from the front line for rest and psychological recovery. Instead, that night, the human soldiers built a small fire behind their defensive line. They sat around it quietly, one by one. They said the names of the soldiers who had died that day. Some shared small stories about them. Simple things out of joke someone had. Made out of habit, someone had one soldier cried quietly, and one looked away. Another soldier put an arm around him and said nothing. They stayed there together for a long time. Then they slept, and in the morning, they returned to the line. Solon wrote in her personal journal that night, "I felt a kind of respect so large it was almost frightening." She had seen coalition soldiers break under less. Experienced warriors who needed weeks to recover after losing comrades. Humans grieved, but they did not stop at IT. Was as if grief was something they moved through instead of something that stopped them. While this was happening among the coalition forces, something else was happening within the Croth hive mind, something that had never happened before. The hive was struggling. Its greatest strength was predictive modeling that IT could calculate enemy behavior with incredible accuracy. Against every species it had ever fought, this ability had been nearly perfect. Coalition forces were disciplined, consistent, predictable. Predictable enemies were easy to defeat, but humans were not predictable. Not because they were disorganized, because they made individual decisions constantly. Thousands of soldiers making thousands of small choices created a battlefield pattern that looked like noise, and the hive mind could not separate signal from noise, because, with humans, the noise was the signal. Finally, a senior Croth biological commander issued a new directive at IT was something the hive had never needed before. The order was simple: target human morale, focus attacks on human units, inflict heavy casualties where other humans could see them. The hive believed the result was obvious. Other species weakened when they watched their comrades die. Fear spread. Resistance collapsed. IT had worked every time before. IT did not work on humans. Human soldiers saw their friends fall, and it made them angrier. They fought harder, held their positions longer, pushed back with even greater intensity. The hive processed this result for a long time. Then it sent something unusual through its network that a question one the hive had never needed to ask before. What are these creatures made of? No answer came, because the hive did not understand the question itself. Late one night, General Orten stood alone in the Coalition Command Center, but he studied the data from the past. 2 weeks, then he studied it again. Something was changing, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. For the first time since the war began, the numbers were shifting. The probabilities were moving in directions as models had never shown before. Orten did not say anything about this yet, that he was a scientist. He required more evidence before making conclusions, but he remained at the display screens long into the night, watching, thinking, and for the first time in more than a year, the expression on his pale, swarthy face was something his officers had not seen in a long time. Attention, real attention, the kind a brilliant mind gives to something it does not yet understand, because the war was not won. Not even close, but for the first time in 2 years, it was no longer certain that the war was already lost, and far above Vaelther Prime, aboard the human flagship Unbroken, General Maravas was already preparing the next move one that could change the entire war, if anyone survived long enough to complete it. The battlefield had gone silent. The alien fleet that once darkened the sky was now nothing more than drifting wreckage, burning slowly in the cold vacuum of space. Across the galaxy, sensors recorded the same impossible truth. The humans had won. Not because they had the biggest ships, not because they had the most advanced weapons, but because they refused to surrender. Admiral Karth of the Galactic Council stood in stunned silence as the final report arrived. Entire enemy armadas gone. The war that had terrified hundreds of civilizations for centuries ended in a single brutal campaign. And the ones who ended it, humans. Across the council chamber, the representatives of dozens of species whispered among themselves. For years they had feared humanity, their unpredictable nature, their strange mix of compassion and terrifying violence. Now they finally understood. Humans were not the weakest species in the galaxy. They were the ones you called when everything else had already failed. As the human fleet prepared to leave the battlefield, a single message was broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. A calm human voice spoke just 5 words. Next time, don't start wars. And from that day forward, no empire in the galaxy ever underestimated humanity again.